A more modern take on the classic Frankenstein story, let's talk about the angry black girl and her monster. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watch Your Past. I'm here to talk to you about The Angry Black Girl and Monster, which is coming to theaters on June 9th, 2023. It's a modern story that is inspired by the classic Frankenstein tale, and it uses horror to tell a story about race and about perception and about the American experience. It is a movie with a lot of smart updates and an up-and-coming director. My hot take is, look, I think you should rent it. I really like the take on Frankenstein. I like the use of practical effects, and I liked the way that this used horror to tell a story about race and perception. I thought that was all really well done, but I did think the story lost some of the aspects that make Frankenstein a compelling or empathetic character, and there were a few little flaws here and there. Overall, I think it's a rental, but if you're looking for a film that has something to say, then this definitely does. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the movie, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then go into the ending. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers in the ending section. I'll go very briefly. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but I do want to say some of the reasons why I thought this wasn't really an empathetic monster. So I'm going to go into that, but if you don't want to know what happens in this film, I would turn it off when I get to that ending section. Before that, I'll keep it vague, I'll keep it spoiler free, and I'll let you know when I get to those spoilers. So in The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, you have Vicaria, who is a brilliant young teenager who is fascinated, obsessed with death because it's been around her. And when her older brother is killed, she decides to use her obsession and use what she's learned to try to cheat death. And as you would expect, that has mixed results. So things I liked about this movie, it's becoming one of the things I normally say. I love the music. The music is really beautiful. It has like a dreamlike feel at times. It has a sinister feel at times. It really does help to tell the story and really help to kind of like set the mood for a lot of the things that happen. I really think they did a fantastic job. The second thing I love, look, I love the star. I loved Lila DeLeon Hayes' performance in this movie. I thought she did a great job as Vicaria. She has this really tough role where she has to play both like an interesting teenager, like a brilliant, outspoken teenager, but also someone that is, I don't know, she's a little innocent at times. Like she has seen a lot of things, and that is why her obsession with death is there. But she's still a kid, so she does some kid things. She makes some some growing up mistakes, and she has to be sympathetic while she is doing all of this. I don't know, dark and twisted things. It's a really kind of difficult role. It's a really tough role to kind of like quantify. I thought that Laya did a fantastic job. The third thing I loved are the effects, most of them. It is a mostly practical effects movie, and you know me, I love practical effects. I think practical effects, especially in horror, are so important. It really helps you kind of like get into the movie. It doesn't take you out when you see some of this weird gore, and it really does enhance the overall experience when you're not like broken of your enjoyment by seeing poor CG. Like the effects in this film are really good. They are gross. They are gooey. It is exactly what you would want in a horror monster movie. And hats off to the team for doing that. And the last thing I love, look, I love the modern take. One of my favorite things about horror, one of the things I love most about this genre is that you can use horror to tell stories that have, I don't know, more contemporary meanings, more like societal impacts. I love when you can use horror as a vehicle to point out things in society and to kind of share a different experience. And this film does that perfectly. I mean, you can start with the title, The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. I love that title. It is a fantastic title for this movie. You have instances in this film where Vicaria is just the way that people see her, the way that people treat her are completely guided by her race. Like, and it starts with one of the first scenes in the film. It is a very well done scene. I love the way that it set the stage this way. It has Vicaria in class being outspoken, being curious, trying to voice her opinion, and her teacher just feels threatened by it, feels like her authority is getting trampled on. It is something that you would think would be encouraged in school, but presumably because Vicaria is a black girl, she is treated differently, and this leads to an altercation that happens. And it is such a brilliant scene. It's such a smart way to show what should be a common, interesting interaction in class go sour, most likely because of race and inherent prejudice and inherent bias and things like that. And that comes through in the title. I love this title because that is like a, I don't know, stereotypical view of someone who might be outspoken, who maybe has views on things, who maybe has like very strong opinions, and that is kind of changed and weaponized into saying that she's angry. But Vicaria is, she is angry justifiably for some reasons, but a lot of the things she's just curious, she's brilliant, she wants to, solve this problem, and so that leads her to be very outspoken and leads her to be very kind of obsessed. And I thought that that was a really great title and a really great use of the horror vehicle. I love that this lets me see a different perspective and a different kind of way of growing up. It's not something that I personally experienced growing up, and I think it's important for me and others to see how this could happen, to see a different take on society, a different way of growing up. It just opens your eyes to different perspectives and different ways of living, and I love that. I love that they used horror to tell that story. So I'll get off my soapbox, even though I really, really enjoyed that part of this movie. Look, I said this is a rental. I said that there were a lot of things I loved. Ultimately, I do think it's a rental, and here's why. So the first thing I didn't love, this is a very minor point, but some of the effects were CG. There's some scenes that I think, by necessity they had to use CG, and it doesn't look great. Now, thankfully, there's only a few, so it's not a big break, but when it happens, it looks like kind of the effects out of almost a TV movie, like some things I used to see on TV. It looks like that. And again, it's not egregious, and most of the effects are practical, but it did look silly during some very, very prominent, very important scenes. The second thing I didn't love as much is a very slow start to this movie. I just got done talking about how much I love the opening scene. I love the opening scene, but the film takes a long time to develop. It takes a while to get to the actual kind of Frankenstein part of it. So it just took its time getting to the horror part. And I kind of wish it would have gotten there a little bit earlier. Maybe it could have had spent a little bit of that time differently for my third point, which is kind of the biggest factor for me. So the third thing I didn't love, and there might be minor spoilers here. So if you don't want to know anything about this movie, you don't want to know anything, you want to go in blind, turn it off now. But for me, the thing that I didn't love the most about this movie is that there was a certain lack of empathy I had with the monster. Now, the thing I think is most important about Frankenstein and most kind of critical to that story you feel you feel empathy for the Frankenstein character. He is, the whole story is he is this kind of grotesque thing that society turns into a monster. And that is definitely one of the things that they are trying to get through in this movie. But I didn't get that empathy at the start. When Vicaria revives Chris, she is afraid of him. And you would think that she would be more empathetic. Like Chris is, I don't know, dangerous. You don't get this sense that he is like misunderstood or that he is like confused. He just kind of is a monster at the start. And I think that the film tries to use situations and things like that to show how society is forcing him to become a monster. But I think it needed a little bit more empathy at the start. I think the film needed maybe a little bit more time with just Vicaria and Chris so that she could get a better understanding of him, so that you could show that Chris was, I don't know, confused or gentle or, just a product of whatever this horrible situation was. And you didn't get that. It goes more on the horror side. And so Vicaria is scared of Chris, and that, leads her to run away. And then Chris eventually encounters others who cause him to do bad things. And so for me, I just didn't really, it felt more like a monster movie and not like a Frankenstein movie. And so I just didn't really have much empathy for Chris or the things that he was doing, especially as the film progressed. So ultimately, I think it's a rental, but I think it's a smart film. I think it's interesting. It definitely has something to say. So that is The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. It's coming to theaters on June 9th, 2023. I'm going to go into the ending right now. So if you don't want to know what happens in this movie, turn it off now because there will be spoilers. So in The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, you have Vicaria and her father, Donald. So Vicaria is obsessed with death. Her mother was killed by a stray bullet when she was 8, and that led her to really kind of be touched with death and be obsessed with death. But it's also like her environment leads her to be kind of surrounded by death. And then her brother gets involved in the gang, and he gets killed a little bit later. And this leads Vicaria to try to conquer death. She seems to think that death is a disease, and so she wants to cure it, and she wants to cure Chris and bring him back. Eventually, after she sees someone getting like defibbed, which is I think was a very smart way to kind of show this kind of interaction and how she could maybe use electricity to bring him back, she uses electricity to bring Chris back to life. But it doesn't seem to be the same Chris that she thought. He is more guttural, he is more kind of primal, and whatever he touches causes these like burning scars on people. It's an interesting dynamic, but again, it made me not feel super empathetic because when he like grabbed Vicaria's wrist, it left this like big imprint on her, and she like ran away scared. I wish that she would have been, I don't know, more empathetic, more kind of interested in like interacting with him and seeing him like on a one-on-one basis and not just in these scary situations where stuff happens. So after Chris is kind of revived, Vicaria passes out from the whole exertion. So initially, Vicaria wakes up and Chris is on the loose. And one of the other characters in this movie, this gang leader named Kango, one of his guys is out on the street and Chris attacks him. He doesn't kill him, but he hurts him very badly. And Vicaria gets Chris back into the warehouse, locks it. She's afraid of him, and she kind of leaves him in that warehouse. As you can imagine, Chris probably doesn't want to be in the warehouse. He wants to go home. He breaks out of the warehouse and eventually confronts other people where he gets into altercations. Like, I don't he never really initiates it, but he definitely finishes these altercations and eventually kills a few people. Now, Chris also ends up hanging out in the, I guess, abandoned house next to Vicaria's family, and there's a little like slit where I guess he can see through and see what's happening. And Vicaria can see him occasionally, and her younger sister Jada sees him a lot. And she seems to have a connection with Chris. She will mention that she's talking to him. She'll mention, she'll say, "Where's Chris?" She'll kind of know where he is. So eventually, after some backstabbing, Vicaria and Kango have to work together. And they have to work together to stop Chris because Chris seems to be out of control. He ends up killing his dad, and he also kills Jamal, who, to be fair, was trying to hurt Kango and Vicaria. But it seems like Chris is a little bit too dangerous, so they have to stop him. Vicaria wants to use electricity to kill him because electricity is what brought him to life. But she needs her tools. She needs all the tools that she was using to create him. Vicaria and Kango split up to get the various tools. Eventually, Kango gets the tools to Vicaria, but he's also killed by Chris. So Chris's body count is like rising crazily. But Vicaria now has all the tools. She lures him to the warehouse. So she uses the electricity, is able to shock him. I was a little surprised because like she's standing in the middle of all this electricity. It never hits her, which a little unrealistic. And this is where they had that CG that looked kind of like a TV movie. They also had it when Chris was, born or recreated. But you have these like electrical lightning bolts that kind of go between various parts of this. It doesn't look great, but thankfully there's only a few of them. But the result of this is they shock Chris. He falls over and he's weak but not dead. And there's a conversation between Vicaria and Chris where Chris basically says like, "I'm a monster, I'm a monster." And Vicaria's like, "No, you're Chris. You're my daddy's son, my mother's child." And Jada is here too. And she asks, "Well, why did he hurt everyone?" And Vicaria explains like they called him a monster and he believed that they made him a monster. Which I get that that was the point. I get that that was the idea behind this. I just don't think it did a great job. Like I think they needed to make Chris more innocent at the start and then have him become the monster versus it almost felt like he was always the monster in this. He always was violent. He was always kind of attacking people. And it just made me not really feel that sympathetic. And then when you find out more of what Chris did, I don't feel very sympathetic at all for him. Like he killed his dad. Eventually you find out that he went back home and everyone thought that he was a monster. His whole family thought he was a monster. So they attacked him and he killed his entire family, which again, not very sympathetic. Doesn't like make me think, "Oh, poor Chris." Like, I'm like, good, like, go away, Chris. But he killed their entire family. Everyone is dead. And Jada, like, when she sees and Vicaria, when she sees them, I thought this reaction was not very good. Like, she should have been devastated. She just like whispered sorry. And she's standing in the middle of her house with like everyone dead around her. Her little sister goes and like starts playing with blocks, but she does have a smart idea. She's like, "Well, why don't you just bring them back? Like you brought Chris back, you should just bring them back." And Vicaria's like, "It doesn't work that way. Like you saw what happened with Chris." And Jada says, "But they were just here," and that makes Vicaria think, okay, well they were fresh. Like when she revived Chris, Chris had been dead for a while, so maybe that had some effect on it. So she takes she takes her sister-in-law, who was Chris's wife, who apparently he killed. She was pregnant, so he killed both her and his like pregnant son. So he killed both her and his unborn child. But she's the first one that Vicaria wants to survive. She somehow drags her to her like lab, to her warehouse lab, uses the Frankenstein machine, shocks her back to life, and she gets up and she's fine. And thankfully, her baby's fine. Now, they were going to name the baby Victor because a boy, and they wanted to name the baby after Vicaria. So I thought that was kind of sweet. But she's alive. The baby's alive. You're scared for a second, but thankfully the baby's alive. So after the sisters revived, after she checks to make sure the baby is alive, she says, "Where's the rest of our family?" And Vicaria says, "They'll be here soon." So presumably Vicaria will revive the other members of her family. Hopefully they all come back. Hopefully they're not horribly scarred. But it seems like her death machine has to only be used on fresh bodies. But that is the Angry Black Girl and Monster. Like I said, I liked a lot about it. I liked the idea. I liked how it was trying to address societal topics. I liked the practical effects. I just didn't love the way that it kind of like used the monster. So definitely think it's a rental, but you should definitely check it out eventually. It's coming to theaters on June 9th, 2023. And then it's coming to digital on demand on June 23rd, 2023. So check it out one of those ways. And thanks so much for watching. If you liked this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.